Alchemia6962 recently asked, "Can you explain the Ashwamedha?" Which is a great question because the Ashwamedha was one of the most famous animal sacrifices in Hindu history. But wait a minute, don't Hindus believe in ahimsa, which means non-violence? Aren't they supposed to be vegetarians? If that's so, why do we see so many stories from ancient and modern India that involve animal killing? It's true, Hindus are among the most vegetarian people in the world. In fact, a recent Pew survey found that most Indians, whether Vaishnav or not, either identify as vegetarians or limit their meat consumption due to religious principles. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism and many other Vaishnav sects, it's required that one refrain from illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and of course meat eating in order to take initiation into certain mantras from a guru. But when we read stories from within the Vaishnav canon, like from Srimad Bhagavatam, Mahabharata, or Ramayana, we see all kinds of animal sacrifice taking place. The Ashwamedha, or horse sacrifice, is one of the most famous and elaborate animal sacrifices in Hinduism. In ancient times, this sacrifice was performed by kings and emperors as a display of their power and superiority, or even to atone for sins. During this sacrifice, a horse was ceremonially released into the wild to wander where it may. Whatever kingdom the horse happened to wander into, that kingdom had to submit itself to the king who was doing the sacrifice or face war. In either case, the horse was then led to a sacrificial arena and killed as an offering to the gods. While the Ashwamedha is a thing of the past, other animal sacrifices and the subsequent eating of the animal's flesh is still performed in India today. So why do we see an ostensibly vegetarian people killing animals? The answer lies in history and, as the 11th century Vaishnav philosopher Ramanuja points out, in the human mind itself. In ancient times, both in India and in the West, animal sacrifice was seen as a means to propitiate the gods and to gain rewards for the one performing the sacrifice. Something of great value, like the livestock upon which one's livelihood depended, was given up to the gods who would then be indebted to mankind, and therefore provide rain for the crops, riches, or victory in battle to the one performing the sacrifice. So often, it was simply the desire for earthly power, influence, or prosperity that prompted these blood sacrifices, not to mention the desire to consume the meat that ultimately followed from these animal killings. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, contemplating the objects of the senses, the mind becomes attached to the objects of the senses. And from attachment, it's a slippery slope to obsession and self-destruction. Thus, it was not long before the powerful and wealthy began sacrificing animals en masse in order to get worldly benefits from the gods. But how do we know this goes against Hindu principles? Don't the Vedas themselves, which are the holy texts of Hinduism, recommend animal sacrifice in the first place? It's true, the Rig Veda describes several animal sacrifices that are to be performed, including the sacrifice of goats, rabbits, monkeys, horses, and even ants. But as Ramanuja points out in his commentary in Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas contain all kinds of injunctions for regulated action, even when those actions are undesirable or ultimately unsanctioned by the Vedas themselves. So why would Hindu scriptures instruct us to do things that it ultimately doesn't want us to do? As Ramanuja reveals, the human mind, being conditioned to behave in certain ways by past experiences, tends to continue in familiar activities regardless of the consequences. I mean, how often have we seen someone who's so controlled by habit that they can't quit smoking regardless of how bad it is for their health? Similarly, if one has been conditioned by their culture and society to believe that they need to sacrifice an animal to get good benefits to the gods, that belief is very hard to break. For this reason, the Vedas give regulative principles for people to follow, even for criminal activities. There's even a scripture laying down the regulative principles for stealing. Gradually, as that person's activities become regulated by those principles, the tendency to steal, take intoxicants, or sacrifice animals and eat meat will tend to reduce. When these activities no longer have such a strong power over the individuals who do them, they may become more free to choose the path of goodness. But if advising animal sacrifice to those inclined to eat meat or gain special favor from the gods seems counterproductive, one need only look at the Western world to see what the alternative is. Massive industrial slaughterhouses killed hundreds of millions of animals a year to serve the meat industry. Chickens are ground alive by machines to make feed. Cows are lined up and slaughtered for sometimes days at a time. Much of the meat that's produced isn't even consumed. It sits and rots on shelves or is thrown away as unsuitable. This is the result of a society that slaughters animals without any religious regulations. And it is to avoid this kind of uncontrolled behavior that the Vedas offer regulative principles for the killing of animals. But where exactly do Hindu scriptures say that it's bad to kill animals and that such actions should be given up? In Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 25, it's said, Ete tvam sapratikshante smaranto vaishasam tava samparetam ayakutesh chindantyutitam manyavaha. This means all these animals are awaiting your death so that they can avoid the injuries you have inflicted upon them, meaning the animals that have been sacrificed. It says, after you die, they will angrily pierce your body with horns. So there's a price to pay. These Shastras are telling us that you can't get away from that reaction. Further, in Srimad Bhagavatam 11.5.13, it said, Evam vyavya prajaya naratya imam vishuddham nabidu swadharmam. The sacrificial offering of animals is permitted, but there's no provision for wide-scale animal slaughter. Unfortunately, however, the less intelligent materialists cannot understand that their duties in life should be performed purely on the spiritual platform. From this, we can clearly see that the act of sacrificing animals and eating meat is allowed only for those who cannot stop such activities. And even then, it's only allowed so that they may eventually cease these activities through regulative principles. Nevertheless, it's also clearly stated that one cannot avoid the karmic reaction for killing animals for one's own sense pleasure. The practice of animal sacrifice is mostly a thing of the past within Hinduism, since most Hindu denominations have long since banned such practices. Still, some sects hold out, most notably the Shakta traditions, for whom blood sacrifices are still performed. The Vedic texts of India know that old habits die hard, and that shame or ridicule is not effective in curbing such behavior. But whether one's seeking to display royal dominance, as in the Ashwamedha horse sacrifice, or simply seeking to enjoy meat, as in modern animal sacrifice, by acting within regulated boundaries, we can gradually loosen the grip that our habits have over us and progressively attain more freedom in the choices that we make. So the next time that you hear about some Hindu animal sacrifice and wonder why an ostensibly vegetarian people are killing animals, remember that this act is meant to eventually free those people from the grip of addiction to meat eating and animal killing. And in the process, these regulative principles are saving many animals from the uncontrolled killing that we see in slaughterhouses. Okay, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you have a question or a comment about yoga or Hinduism, leave it in the comments below and I'll answer it in a video like this. Jai Shri Radhe.